Netroots Nation. Hold on, that's not even enough energy. Good evening, Netroots Nation. Listen, I know it's been a long day, but this isn't the time to lose the energy because I'm going to be drawing from it as we tell the story of a movement that we've been building right here in Pittsburgh. So first of all, before I say anything, I want to first thank that movement. I want to thank the movement that brought to you the opportunity to be introduced by the first black mayor of Pittsburgh in its history. The same movement brought to you the opportunity to be introduced to our lovely city, the first black woman to ever serve in Congress. And no, we're not all the way over the hump yet, but we're going to speak it into existence because we know that the work that we have been laying here in Pittsburgh, the work that we have been laying in our progressive movement is going to be what is going to transform not just our region, not just our city, but it's going to be what's going to transform this whole country. And that's why I'm here and proud to be here with you all today, because this is the energy that we are going to need to carry us into November, but this is the energy that we're going to need to carry us everywhere we go. Because the reality is that we have a lot of work to do. And you all got a lot. I'm sorry that I can't rap like Brother Jasiri. I might not preach like Ed Gainey, but I hope that you'll bear with me because I believe that right here in Pittsburgh, right here where I'm from, where I grew up in the Mon Valley, Braddock, PA, 15104, where we were forged out of the furnace, I believe that the story that we have out of Braddock is one that can help people all over this country as we're trying to figure out where does our progressive movement go and how are we going to get there. And I want to say that this has been a rough primary cycle, but it's also been one that we've had great victories too. And here in my story, and I'm here today as the first black woman who may go to Congress from Pennsylvania, but before that, I was an organizer. I was an organizer and an activist, fighting and building relationships with my community, doing only what I knew how to do. I had to take the first step just like everybody else. And what I learned through this journey is how we can build and how we can fight back against every oppressive system and institution that we have in this country, but also that we're going to have to. It's going to be those movements. It's going to be those organizers that are going to carry us through. And that's what we have seen here in Pittsburgh. So for folks who don't know me, I am currently the state representative here in Pittsburgh. I'm also the founder, co-founder of one of the movement groups, one of the electoral organizations that has come in and made it our business to start to change the tide of who our people are who are going to be representing us in our government. Because we looked up in Pittsburgh and we got tired of never seeing ourselves reflected, right? We got tired of people, and I'm sorry, and I hope that I don't offend anybody, but we got tired of people telling us to vote, but never telling us to run. Always telling us that we have to show up for others, but never helping us to show up for ourselves. So from that attitude, from that kind of spirit, birthed the movement here in one of the most unlikely places, because you might have been following what's happened in Pittsburgh, but if you only started following it throughout this election cycle, if you only started following Pittsburgh when I started running for Congress, or maybe you just started following it when Ed Gainey ran for mayor. But if you haven't only started, and you've missed a big part of the story of how this movement picked up here, because we're gonna have to go further back than that. Because when I first ran for the state house in 2018, there were no black women who had ever served in any statewide office in any legislative capacity. We had one woman in our delegation. We had very few black folks who had ever served in our region. And this was a region that was known to be the home of the Blue Dog Dems, right? This was the place here in Pittsburgh where it was majority white, where it was our representatives were legacy, typically older, white, conservative men who shared and held spaces and for decades and decades, but also they held seats even in communities that didn't look anything like them. So when we first stepped up, and when I first stepped up and said I was going to run, people looked at us like we were crazy. Because how in this area where if you don't have millions of dollars, if you don't even have hundreds of dollars, because the reality is I didn't even have hundreds of dollars, but if you don't have that sort of money and you don't have those sorts of networks and you don't have those connections, how are you going to make a splash in this electoral game that was Pittsburgh entrenched status quo establishment politics? And that's why I wanted to start by thanking our movement groups. because the coalitions that we've been building here has been taking on the power in and out of election cycles, and it is the movement that brought to you where we are right now. When we first started, people asked us, how progressive can you be? How progressive can you be in Pittsburgh? Because if you don't know Pittsburgh is, and I told you, that town where it was steel and labor, but even when we talk about our unions, it was always a nostalgic kind of whiter union, a labor representation that doesn't look like our service industry unions. Or when we talk about the activism in this town, maybe it was activism that was more liberal, more white, but it didn't look like the young black folks that I saw protesting when Antoine Rose II was killed. When we look at the leadership that was elevated, it rarely looked like those of us who were most impacted by the policies, most impacted by the leadership, most impacted by the flow of money in and out of this city, where we have big foundations that run it all. But we found that when we go and when we do the work, when we speak authentically as ourselves, right? When we show up every day as us, that we can actually start to make a change. And what that meant is that we weren't going to play to anybody else. This wasn't the time anymore, and now is not the time to play to anybody else, because we've seen the game over and over and over again. We know what game they're playing. We know what their cards are here. In our movement, whether you're in Pittsburgh or elsewhere, we all know what the establishment's cards are, right? They come in and they flood their money into districts where progressive women of color are running for office. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But we know that they're going to flood their money. We know that they're going to tell us, we are always told that you can't be too progressive. When you run, you can't be too black. Right? You can't show up and you can't speak your dialect, your language. You got a code switch, right? When you show up, you have to dress a certain way and you have to sound a certain way, and you always have to appeal. The number one rule is that you always have to appeal to some person in the middle who you ain't never met. Some person in the middle who has never been in your community, never known your struggle, but that's the person who we are going to cater everything that we do, our messaging, our money, our resources, our canvassing, always to that person. Well, we came in to break that yoke, because here in Pittsburgh, we knew that we couldn't afford to do that anymore, because while we kept chasing that elusive swing voter, black and brown people were dying every day. While we were chasing folks who were just too eager, a little too eager to go over to the Republican side anyways, we had young voters and progressive voters and black voters. We had immigrants. We had poor folks. We had working class folks who were just waiting for somebody who was going to take the time to speak to them and speak for them and come into their communities and make sure that we are being intentional about running that race. That's how we started to build a movement here in Pittsburgh from scratch. From scratch, we built our movement here in Pittsburgh, right? But what we know is, and what I know that you all know, because you are organizers, you are the front lines, you're the activists, the grassroots folks, you're the planners, whether it be digital, you are the folks who are behind the tables. So I know that you all know that no pathway is easy, and we've won big in this region, right? We won not just my race, we saw the women that you had on this stage who won at the same time as me and my brother Malcolm from Philly. We won't forget you. But we also won races at the school board level. We won races at the county council level where folks weren't looking for us. And we came in when they were sleeping, and we said that that's power for us, right? We looked up in Pittsburgh and we decided it was time to stop fighting the power. What if we just started taking the power? What if we started building the power? What if we started building power around the most marginalized? What if we started centering the voices of the most impacted, and not just bringing people who say and nod when they talk, but how about what if they came from us? What if all of our movements look like the people who are most impacted? Everywhere we go, we know that that is a winning message, and I'm here to tell you that. I want to use the rest of my time to tell you that your messages are winning messages. Don't listen to the noise that tells you that you can't win as a progressive, and that you can't win as a black woman, that you can't win as a poor working class person. That's a lie from the pit of the establishment and the pit of our racial capitalized system. That's what they need us to believe, because when we realize that our real power is in our collective, when our real power is in our boldness, when our real power is precisely in that way, those ways in which we've been marginalized, and realizing that if we just step up and stand together, that we will take them on. That's what they found in Pittsburgh, and they weren't able to stop it. So I want to say that in Pittsburgh, my race was very close to have gone the other way. And we didn't, because we had something that they had not counted on. We knew their game. We saw through their smoke screens. And I want to talk about how it's time that we need to start seeing through folks' smoke screens. It's time to stop punching left, stop punching right, stop accepting that you can't show up as yourself. When we knocked on doors and when we decided to run for Congress, I decided that we were going to run on the same things that we cared about, that I ran to get in the State House. We talked about on black doors and white doors. We talked about urban doors, ex-urban doors, because when they redistricted us, they made our district more conservative, they thought. But we went into those conservative areas, and we talked about a working class movement, and we talked about a living wage for everybody, and we talked about Medicare for all. Yes, we talked about a Green New Deal, and we talked about the fact that environmental racism can no longer be allowed to impact black communities and kill black babies and give us asthma. We talked about how our housing crisis is real. We talked about how our criminal legal system has always been built the way to hurt us. We talked about abolition. We talked about wages. We talked about all the things they told us we couldn't talk about. And let me tell you, don't let the margin of our victory fool you that somehow that message didn't work. Because when they came in with their millions, they didn't talk about defund the police. They didn't talk about socialism. They didn't talk about any of the things that we thought they would. They had to make up narratives. They didn't even talk about what they claim that their issue is. They came in here and they were willing to tell our voters anything that they needed to win. They were willing to say that they were progressives. They were willing to say that I wasn't a Democrat enough, say that we weren't going to be loyal enough. But what they did not say is what they cared about, because they knew that our message resonated, because we were up by 25 points, right? They knew, and we know that right now, money in politics is going to be one of the biggest barriers we have. So let me say before I get up off of this stage that we know, right? We all know in this room what's at stake. We know what's at stake in November. This isn't the type of crowd that doesn't know what's at stake. We know that democracy is on the line and on the ballot. We know that healthcare is on the ballot. We know that environmental justice is on the ballot. And we know that we have a trifecta still. We know that it's time to stop just talking about what's at stake and talking about what we have to worry about. We need to start calling out what our barriers are, what is standing in our way of having the big transformational victories that we deserve for all people, right? And that means we got to get real about who's standing in our way, and it ain't always partisan. Because the reality is that big money in politics hurts all of us. Big money in politics are okay as long as the target is the person that we don't like. They won't stand up when the target is a black woman who is progressive and leftist. They won't stand up when the target is somebody who talks about racist systems. They won't stand up when the target are folks who talk about healthcare, when the targets might be in the squad. That's when they'll turn the other cheek. But what I'm telling you is that if we don't get it together, the target will be our whole country. Because none of us can exist, none of us can thrive as long as our parties are beholden to corporate power. As long as both of our parties, our media, until our whole system can't get out of the chokehold that corporate PAC money, that dark money, that oil and gas has us in. And that means that we have to start being introspective about what we want our party and our movement to look like, who we want it to look like. Because right now we have to choose, and we have a very small amount of time, but we got to choose what master are we going to serve. Because let me tell you, our party can't serve two. We cannot be the party of working class and poor folks. We cannot be the party of black and brown folks and trans and queer folks, disabled folks. We cannot be the party of the people and also be the party of the corporations. We can't be the party that's for a reflective democracy and be okay with money flooding and silencing the voices of the most impacted. That's what we were up against when we ran. But they hit a wall when they came to Pittsburgh. They hit a wall when we came to Pittsburgh because our movement found out the solution a while ago. We found out that when we build our coalitions, that we can beat all the money but we have to raise that money. When we build our coalitions and we expand the electorate, when we go after the swing voter who is swinging from Democrat to non-voter, when we go after the black folks, when we go after the harmed, when we have to go after the traumatized, when we go and we reach them with a message that resonates and centers them, they will come. And that's why I'm here today. And I hope that throughout this meeting, this whole networking event, that you take the message that we have to stand stronger now than ever in our values. We cannot equivocate on who we are. When you run and when you organize and when you serve, do not equivocate, because our message is a winning one. Because Pittsburgh can show you that we can win here, we can win everywhere. If we can win here in the state, in the city of Blue Dog Dems on environmental justice, then we can win on environmental justice anywhere. If we can win here on defeating big money, then we can win it everywhere. If we can win here on Medicare for all in the land of UPMC, then we can win it everywhere. If we can win here on housing justice, on the workers' rights, on labor, on unions, we will win it everywhere. So take heart, y'all. The fight is going to be long. The battle is going to be hard. But we have the tools. We have the movement. And only in movement will we topple every one of these oppressive systems and institutions. So thank you. And I hope that you are encouraged and ready for the fight that we have ahead of us.